Hello and welcome to Sleepsmyth, your peaceful place to unwind, dream, and drift gently into sleep. Before we start our story tonight, let me help you settle in with a simple, calming breath like a gentle lullaby for your body and mind. So, find a cozy spot, maybe snuggle under your blanket, and softly close your eyes. Now, breathe in quietly through your nose for 4 seconds. 1, 2, 3, 4. Hold that breath softly for 7 seconds. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. And now, slowly exhale through your mouth for 8 seconds, letting all the tension melt away. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. Let's do that again. Nice and easy. Breathe in. 1, 2, 3, 4. Hold. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. Breathe out. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. One last time, just like a soft whisper, breathe in. 1, 2, 3, 4. Hold. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. Breathe out. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. Feel your body getting lighter, your mind quiet, as if you're being tucked gently into a calm, warm bed. Thank you for sharing this moment with Sleepsmyth. Now, relax completely and let the story carry you into a peaceful, restful sleep. Let's begin.
The thing about love is, it doesn't arrive on schedule. It doesn't follow arcs, or seasons, or finales. Sometimes, it's a pilot that never aired, or a story written out of order. It happens in fragments, in reruns, in scenes we swore we'd forget, and somehow never did. Some loves start loud, like an opening theme. Others slip in during a cold open, a glance across a crowded room, a joke that lands, a silence that doesn't. Tonight, we press play on the stories that stayed, the ones that didn't end when the credits rolled. Love as longing, love as chaos, love as a jailbreak. Ted Mosby and Tracy McConnell. A hopeless romantic meets the girl he spent a lifetime chasing. A love years in the making. But borrowed time is never enough. This is the soulmate he waited for, and the goodbye he never wanted. Jimmy Shive-Overly and Gretchen Cutler. Two people who don't believe in love, somehow crash headfirst into it. Flawed, funny, volatile, and just tender enough to stay. Their romance doesn't heal them. It holds them together. Michael Scofield and Sara Tancredi. A genius with a plan. A doctor caught in the crossfire. And a prison break that begins a love story no one saw coming. They loved through walls, through grief, through death itself. 3 couples, 3 kinds of survival. Not perfect, not easy, but real. So lean back, dim the lights. Let the episodes of us begin again. Right here, after midnight, where the stories never end the way they're supposed to. This is Lovelore After Midnight. And tonight, love rewrites itself. Before the goodbye, there was you. A narration inspired by How I Met Your Mother, the story of Ted Mosby and Tracy McConnell. A love found late, lost too soon, where fate whispers through yellow umbrellas and quiet goodbyes. The architect of almosts. He told the story 1,000 times, to strangers at bars, to friends at brunch, to his children, curled on a couch beneath the golden hush of a fading day, in a house full of warmth and ghosts and echoes of once upon a time. This is the story of how Ted Mosby met their mother. But really, it's the story of every almost that led him there, of every woman he loved and lost, of all the times the stars nearly aligned and then didn't. Robin, Victoria, Stella, Zoe. Beautiful names, etched in temporary places, held like fireflies, released with trembling hands. They were real, but not her. They were chapters, not the title page. Ted was an architect. Of buildings, yes, but mostly of dreams. He mapped out love the way others mapped out cities, believing in fate with a child's wonder, sketching soulmates between subway stops and rainy sidewalks, always chasing the outline of someone he had never met, but somehow already missed. He was the guy who stole a blue French horn, who gave speeches instead of toasts, who waited at the top of skyscrapers with balloons and belief. He wanted the kind of love that played like a theme song, that made ordinary days feel like finales. But love made him wait and wait and wait. Through breakups, best man speeches, broken leases, through winter trains and summer rooftops. Through being too early for one woman and too late for another. I'm that guy. He once said, I still believe in the one. So he searched for her laugh in crowded rooms, for her story in books left open on coffee shop counters, for signs in strangers, for fate in flight delays and yellow umbrellas. And she was there. Always just out of frame, at the same concert, on the same platform, walking by the same bakery, living parallel, like a harmony waiting for the right melody. But love, like architecture, takes time. Sometimes the foundation must crack before it can hold. And Ted had to learn to let go of blueprints, to leave space for surprise. And in that space, she was coming closer, step by patient step, umbrella in hand, heartbeat in sync. Not late, just perfectly, quietly, right on time. The girl beneath the yellow umbrella. She liked coins and breakfast foods. She played bass in a wedding band, once followed a boy into economics, and stayed for the music he left behind. Her name was Tracy McConnell. and she lived like a song you didn't know you knew, until it played and your heart caught up. She laughed with her whole face, soft and sudden, like sunlight through blinds. She believed in things that couldn't be graphed, like timing and magic, and the strange way grief can bloom into grace. She had loved once, Max, the kind of love that fills a room without speaking, the kind that ends before it should, that leaves shadows on birthdays and pauses in conversations. After Max, she didn't close herself off. She became gentler, stranger, more tender with strangers. She smiled at buskers, gave change without looking, held pain like a stringed instrument, let it hum beneath everything. Her world was messy, musical, full of warmth and almosts. A roommate who brought home girls who left in the morning, a professor who didn't know her name, a future that unfolded like a story told in shuffle mode. But she trusted it. Life. Even when it rained. Especially when it rained. She carried a yellow umbrella, not to keep dry, but as a kind of hope, a signal, a charm against coincidence wasted. Their lives brushed like strangers in a hallway. The same apartment, borrowed boots, near misses. Close calls spun by the quiet thread of timing. And then the day it changed. The Farhampton train station. Rain painting stories on the pavement. Ted standing beneath the overhang. Heart rattling in his chest like change in a coat pocket. And Tracy, base slung across her back. Umbrella bright against the grey. Eyes that smiled before her lips moved. Hi, he said. Hi, she answered. And something shifted. Not loudly, not all at once, but like a note struck perfectly in tune. The kind of moment you don't write. You remember, and remember, and remember again. The long hello. Their first conversation wasn't loud. It didn't crackle with fireworks or sweeping strings. It was soft, a shared laugh in the rain, an ease that wrapped around them like a borrowed sweater. He offered her the umbrella. She refused with a smile. And still, he walked beside her. Not out of chivalry, but instinct. They spoke like they'd been holding the words for years, trading stories like puzzle pieces. The coin collection, the mother who crocheted hats for ducks, the lecture he almost missed, the roommate who left toast in weird places. Their dialogue wasn't dialogue. It was music, a rhythm only they could hear. Stitched with pauses, glances, those slow-burning seconds where eyes meet and something inside exhales. There was no rush. The world slowed around them. The train schedules, the ticking clock, all irrelevant. Tracy told him about Max, not in mourning, but in memory. And Ted. Ted didn't flinch. He listened like he was holding a fragile photo, like he understood that love can leave and still be sacred. That night, they walked through a city made tender by drizzle, street lamps glowing like fireflies trapped in glass, storefronts casting slow dancing shadows, and in between them, this thread, invisible, but unbreakable. He asked for her number, fumbling. She laughed again, that laugh, the one that would live in his ribs long after she was gone. "Maybe you're the love of my life," he said with a nervous grin. And she didn't run. She didn't say too soon. She said, maybe. Not as a tease, but a truth. A maybe filled with someday. It wasn't just attraction. It was timing catching up. Two hearts arriving where they were always meant to. And as she stepped onto her train, turning back just once, Ted felt something settle. A quiet certainty. Not fireworks, but constellations, mapped out in his chest. She was real. She was here. And for once, the story wasn't waiting anymore. It had begun. Finally. Days that felt like music. They didn't fall in love all at once. They became it, like a song played slowly, note by note, breath by breath. Morning coffees in mismatched mugs. The sound of her warming up the bass in the living room. Ted dancing badly in socks across her kitchen tiles. Burnt pancakes, forgotten umbrellas, inside jokes scrawled on napkins. Love made its home in the quiet, not the declarations, but the way she'd fix his tie before a meeting, the way he'd leave post-its on her mirror that read, "You're my favorite person." They wandered bookstores, read poems to each other in bad accents, got lost on purpose in unfamiliar streets, tracing the city like they were reading each other's pasts. Tracy took him to her favorite cemetery. She liked the stillness. "Places like this remind you to love harder," she said. And he kissed her there, among the names and flowers. Because some moments ask not to be delayed. Ted the planner found joy in surprise. Tracy the improviser found peace in promises. They dreamed out loud. Kids with weird names, a house by a lake. She wanted a garden, he wanted a library. They agreed on a porch swing and a dog named Marvin. Some nights, they talked until sunrise painted the windows gold. Other nights, they didn't talk at all. They just held each other like the silence was sacred. He told her about Robin, and Tracy didn't flinch either. She smiled and said, "Some people come into your story to remind you what love isn't, before you find what it is." She saw him, all of him, not just the hopeless romantic, but the man with flaws and fears. And still she stayed. Their love wasn't perfect, but it was theirs. Messy, meaningful, melodic. And in those months, those stitched together days of music and midnight cereal, they built something timeless, a forever that didn't need to last forever, to matter. Yellow umbrellas and wedding vows. They got engaged on a Thursday, with a lopsided ring and a kiss that made time hold its breath. It wasn't a spectacle, just two people saying yes in the middle of a moment that already felt like always. Tracy said at first, "I want to grow old with you." And Ted, who had dreamed so long of the moment, didn't plan a speech. He just whispered, "Me too," because sometimes love outgrows words. They were older, wiser. Ted had chased fate for years. Now he understood that real love wasn't the lightning. It was the quiet after, the hand in yours, the home you carry in someone's laugh. They moved in together. Stacked boxes labeled stuff, more stuff, why do we own this? Built a life in layers, photos on the fridge, takeout menus in drawers. Concert tickets taped to mirrors like time-stamped memories. Tracy painted the hallway yellow. "It looks like sunlight," she said. And Ted agreed, because everything about her felt like morning. Their wedding took time. Years, in fact, not out of doubt. But because life happened. Babies, jobs, flu seasons, flat tires. Plans changed and changed again, but love never did. They had a daughter, Penny, named not for luck, but for value, because she was small and infinite. And Tracy held her like she was holding a future Ted had once only imagined. There were fights, of course, about dishes, bedtime routines, the thermostat, but always there was laughter and a return to softness. They had a rule, never sleep angry, so they'd whisper apologies under blankets, trace each other's palms until the silence forgave them. Ted watched her dance with Penny in the living room, spinning barefoot in pajamas, and thought, this is it. Not the grand finale, but the quiet middle, where love lives and stays. The wedding came at last. A small chapel, a snowy afternoon. Lily cried before the vows even began. Marshall forgot his speech. Barney gave an inappropriate toast. And Robin smiled from the back row. Ted looked at Tracy, in that white dress with yellow shoes, and knew she was the answer the universe had been holding all along. The stories we tell. They collected stories like postcards, little flashes of forever pressed into paper. Ted wrote them down in journals. Tracy folded them into lullabies. They were storytellers, not just of love, but of life. The messy bits, the missed buses, the burnt dinners, the nights when Penny wouldn't sleep, and they danced her back to dreaming under the hum of kitchen light. Tracy had a laugh that made strangers turn around. Ted memorized it, said he could find her in any crowd by the sound of her joy. They took road trips with no maps, stopped at diners with names like Sonny's and the Fork and Spoon, kissed in photo booths, left doodles on the walls of restrooms, memories hidden in places only they would know. They told Penny stories that didn't end in happily ever after, but in, and then they kept loving each other even when it was hard. Because that's what they did, even when things got harder, even when Tracy got sick. It started small, a cold that lingered, a cough that wouldn't leave, and then a diagnosis spoken in a room too bright, too sterile, with a doctor who didn't know how to say, "I'm sorry," gently enough. Ted didn't fall apart, not in front of her. He smiled, brought soup, played old jazz records on Sunday mornings. He held her like she was still whole, because to him, she always would be. And Tracy, she wrote letters, tucked them into drawers, books, the pockets of coats Ted wouldn't wear until months later. She made love last on paper, because she knew. She didn't fear the end. She feared leaving before the story was done. But Ted told her, "You'll never really leave." And he meant it, because some loves don't vanish. They echo in bedtime stories, in yellow hallways, in the way a daughter smiles just like her mother did. And still, she stayed, as long as she could, with every ounce of love, every flicker of light, every borrowed heartbeat, because theirs was the kind of love that didn't stop when the clock did. It just turned into story and waited to be told. The empty seat at the wedding. Tracy passed on a Thursday, the same day of the week they got engaged. The house was quiet, too quiet, like the air itself was holding its breath. Ted sat by her side until the end, her hand warm in his, her wedding ring catching the afternoon light. She smiled at him one last time and whispered something only he could hear. Then she was gone, and the world, though still spinning, felt tilted. The kids were too young to understand. Penny asked if Mommy had gone on a trip. Ted said, yes, but she left her love here. He kept her things just as they were. The yellow hallway, the mug with the chipped handle, the records stacked by the turntable. Grief was a strange house. Some days, every room was locked. Other days, he wandered through memories like open doors. Years passed. Penny grew. Luke too. And life, stubborn and slow, began again. Until one day, a wedding invitation arrived. Robin. She was marrying someone else. Ted almost didn't go, but Penny told him, Mom would want you to. At the reception, he found himself at a table with an empty seat beside him, the seat where Tracy should have been. Robin caught his eye from across the room, and for a moment, it was like seeing her for the first time all over again. The way she stood, the way she smiled, different now, older, softer. They talked, laughed, the years between them falling away like autumn leaves. But neither reached for the other. Not yet. The last episode, Ted told the kids the story. From the very beginning, every almost, every wrong turn, every leap of faith. He told it in the living room, while rain tapped the windows, while the city hummed outside. They rolled their eyes at parts, laughed at others, but listened, because they knew this wasn't just a story. It was a love letter to their mother, to fate, to the kind of hope that survives years of waiting. When he was done, Penny said, Dad, you should call her. And Luke added, it's okay. Mom would want you to. Ted smiled, shook his head, but later, he stood outside an apartment building, holding something blue. A French horn. Robin opened the window, saw him there, and in that moment, after decades of almosts, they were just two people again, older, worn in the way only love and loss can shape you, but still, with enough hope left to try one more time. The camera pulled back. The city stretched out behind them. Life still messy, still imperfect, but theirs. And if you were watching closely, in the space between them, in the air just before the first kiss, you could almost hear Tracy's laugh, soft as sunlight, blessing the ending and the beginning. Love Like a Crash Site, a narration inspired by You're the Worst, the story of Jimmy Shive-Overly and Gretchen Cutler, a love that resists definition, collapses, rebuilds, and bleeds honesty through every broken laugh and whispered panic. Wedding and wreckage. There was a wedding. Of course there was. A temple of overpriced joy. Two strangers binding themselves to a forever they barely understood. And in the back row, half drunk, overdressed, and bitter with precision, was Jimmy. Jimmy Shive-Overly, novelist, breaker of hearts and eye contact. He raised his glass and let the venom spill. Not for the couple, not really, but for himself, for every lie love ever told him, for every moment that tried to make him soft. And then, like chaos in heels, she arrived. Gretchen Cutler, eyeliner smudged from last night, or this morning, or always, laughing as she stole a wedding gift with a shrug. Like gravity didn't apply to her. She noticed Jimmy's disgust like it was perfume. He noticed her thievery like a mating call. He called her out. He muttered, "You're not even my type." She called his bluff. "You're the worst," she laughed through smoke. And just like that, they left together. There was no seduction, no tenderness. Just mouths crashing into each other like they were trying to erase the day. They kissed like punishment, slept together like it was theft. And in the fog after, tangled in bed sheets and disbelief, it should have ended there. It didn't, because she didn't leave, and he didn't ask her to. They weren't dating. God, no. They were just around, accidentally orbiting. They made rules, no feelings, no obligations, no good morning texts. But the rules started to blur. She left her toothbrush. She ordered extra Chinese food. They fell asleep watching dumb movies, woke up tangled, and said nothing. They mocked romance in public, but privately memorized each other's rhythms. She knew he wrote best at night. He knew she couldn't sleep unless the room was cold and quiet. They were becoming a shape neither of them could name. So they didn't. It was safer to pretend. Mimosas and monsters. Sundays were sacred, not for rest, not for church, but for the grand tradition of obliteration. They called it Sunday Fun Day, a mockery of suburban normalcy, a war cry against coupledom. But it was something else too, a ritual, a shared secret, a way to stay close without admitting closeness. They dressed ridiculous. They drank with purpose. She started singing, Sunday Fun Day better than a Monday. Can only do it one way, and that is the drunk way. He rolled his eyes, followed her into bars and booths and daylight disasters. They laughed like nothing hurt. But even in laughter, the cracks showed. A flinch when she reached for his hand. A twitch when he saw her dancing with someone else. Feelings, sneaking in like smoke through a keyhole. He'd never say he liked her laugh, but he watched her mouth twitch into it like a memory he didn't want to forget. She'd never admit she liked waking up next to him, but she started sleeping better when she was with him. Once, they argued in public. A stupid thing, something about soup or music or maybe the color of the sky. She shoved him. He shoved her back, accidentally, with too much heat. The moment soured. A silence stretched between them, thick and heavy. And then she kissed him, hard, messy, and he kissed her back like drowning, because that's what they did. Turned every bruise into a joke, every pain into a punchline. They kept pretending it didn't mean anything, that they weren't a thing. But at night, she'd stare at him as he slept, wondering what it would cost to care. And he'd listen for her breathing, long, deep, safe, and never mention how it made him feel whole. They never said, I love you. Not yet, not even close. But they were already bleeding something neither could name. A kind of dependence. A need that felt too dangerous to speak aloud. So they stayed. In that purgatory of almosts, almost caring, almost happy, almost ruined, and beneath it all, love, not yet spoken, but already living in the silence. When the air goes thin, there are silences that feel like peace. And then there are silences that feel like drowning. Gretchen stopped speaking. Not dramatically, not all at once, but in flickers, like light bulbs dimming room by room, until only shadows were left. It started with small things. Skipped brunches, forgotten jokes, smiles that didn't quite stick. Jimmy, at first, thought it was boredom, or maybe just the natural expiration date of whatever this was between them. A flare-up, not a fire. He tried to fix it, brought her sweaters she'd never wear, made her tea she didn't drink, joked about her quirks like they were personality traits, not warning signs. And Gretchen, she kept showing up, but only her body. The girl who used to dance barefoot on bars now moved through rooms like fog, a drink in her hand, then another, then another. She started drinking more, not for fun, but for silence. Wine at breakfast, whiskey before bed, trying to fill whatever was hollow inside her chest. Jimmy noticed, but didn't say much, because when you don't know what's wrong, you start pretending nothing is. He called her name once, twice. She answered, but her voice had traveled a long way to get there. I'm just tired. But tired doesn't last weeks. And the quiet grew teeth. At a party one afternoon, everything felt too loud, too fake, too bright. Lindsay tried to bring the fun. The crowd tried to bring the noise. But Gretchen stood in the kitchen, wine bottle in hand, walls closing in. And when she spoke, it came out like a snap of glass. All of you, sucking the air out of the room with your self-pity-riddled non-problems. This place is an emotional black hole, and if it wasn't for the runners, I would be driving as fast as I could away from you all. But I can't. Because apparently, I live here now due to completely beyond my control wiring issues for which there will be a lawsuit. Yes. There will be a lawsuit. There will be no lawsuit. Silence fell like dust, and the party slowly ended itself. Later, in the garage, after the guests had gone home, after the music and liquor and laughter ran dry, Jimmy and Gretchen stood, not close, not far, just there, surrounded by tools and shadows and the hum of unspoken things. And then she said it, okay, here's an interesting thing you don't know about me. She tried to sound casual, like she was naming her favorite cereal. I'm clinically depressed, it's been going on my whole life. A smile tugged at her mouth, but it wasn't happy. It was the kind you make when you're trying not to scare someone, or trying not to break. Jimmy looked at her, not with pity, not with panic, just listening. He didn't have a cure, didn't offer a solution, didn't run. And somehow, that was enough. Because for once, it wasn't about fixing. It was about staying, even when the air goes thin, even when the weight gets heavy, even when you don't know what to say. Because she was still Gretchen, and he was still Jimmy, and something in them had always been broken, but maybe not beyond recognition, not beyond reach, just broken enough to understand each other. And maybe that was a start. The fort and the quiet. She had been sinking for days, not metaphorically, not poetically, but truly into the mattress, into stillness, into the hum of nothing. Her limbs felt carved from cement, her mouth lined with dust, the light too cruel, the air too loud. And Jimmy, sharp-tongued, helpless Jimmy, couldn't fix it. He tried sarcasm. He tried denial. He brought tacos and played music and pretended it was Sunday again. But nothing worked. So one night, as she lay on the couch in her same sweatshirt, unwashed hair matted like sorrow. He stood in the doorway and almost left. Almost. Because he didn't understand this thing she carried, didn't know how to sit with her in it, didn't yet speak the language of the dark. And still, somewhere between the door and the decision, he turned around. She didn't hear him building it. She only felt the shift in the air, the whisper of fabric swaying above her. Then morning, and the ceiling had changed. Above her, soft folds of blankets suspended like a dream, light filtering through bed sheets, warped and golden like sun through water. She blinked, confused, and there beside her, not speaking, not smiling, just there, Jimmy. His face, open but unreadable, his eyes, tired, but watching her like she mattered. She looked at him, mouth parted, breath caught, and then it came out, unfiltered, involuntary, so small it trembled. You stayed. Not an accusation, not a plea, just wonder and relief. Her voice cracked like wet paper, and then the sobs came, raw, shaking, uncontrolled. She folded forward into her own body, breaking apart. And Jimmy, he didn't tell her it was okay, didn't try to solve her, didn't say anything. He just stayed, there beside her, under the stupid little fort, in the stillness of their wreckage. He simply stayed, and it wasn't magic. It didn't lift the clouds or cure the ache, but it changed something between them, because it was the first time Gretchen wasn't left behind, and the first time Jimmy didn't run when it got real. They didn't kiss. They didn't confess. They just sat there. Two people learning how to love without knowing what that even meant. How to stay without promises. How to hold space without trying to be the light. The blankets fluttered slightly in the morning air, and the silence held them like hands. And Gretchen knew, maybe for the first time, that she could be seen, even when she had nothing to offer, that she could fall apart in front of someone, and they might not leave, not right away, not this time. The things we say in sleep, there are words we save, until they slip out when we aren't looking. Things we won't say awake, but whisper when the brain is too tired to guard the heart. Jimmy had fallen asleep smelling of ketchup and failure. Greasy fries half-eaten on the coffee table. Television still humming in the background like a lullaby for broken adults. Gretchen had cleaned the crumbs off his chest with a napkin, wiped the corners of his mouth like a memory, and gently pulled a blanket over him with hands that didn't know if they were allowed to care this much. She watched him breathe, watched the weight drop from his face like armor slumping off a soldier's shoulders. And then, as she stood to leave, his voice broke the room, low, thick with sleep, almost a murmur, but sharp, unmistakable, a sentence heavy with old rot and pain, something dark, something that made her freeze in place. She didn't move, didn't breathe, just stared at the shape of him under the blanket, at the jaw clenched even in slumber. and after a long silence, she sat back down, not because she knew what to say, but because leaving felt too much like every other door that had ever closed on them. When the early morning came, she woke up even before the sunrise. She went out of the house to smoke, and Jimmy, suddenly awakened by Gretchen's absence in bed, he went out to look for her. Then the moment, not a confrontation, not a confession, just a shared moment, shadowed and still. And she spoke. "You know, after I cleaned the fries off your face and put you to bed, you said something to me that was pretty dark." His eyes blinked open, slow, hesitant, and with the smallest voice, a boy not ready to face himself, he replied, "Don't tell me." She paused. The weight between them swelled like a held breath. Then, with the tiniest smile, cracked but real, "Okay, I won't." She let the silence breathe, and then, as if handing him a secret she'd hidden under her tongue for years, she said it, soft as dusk, frail as hope, "I love you too." Not loud, not even certain, but honest, so honest it hurt. And he didn't say anything back, didn't joke, didn't ruin it, didn't run. He just let it sit between them, like the fort had sat, like the silence had held, like she had broken, and he hadn't left. There were no fireworks, no orchestras swelling, just two damaged people, side by side, trading darkness for something warmer, trading silence for maybe, trading fear for the slow, terrifying promise of staying, not forever, but tonight. And tonight was enough. The proposal and the vanishing. It happened at sunset, on a hill staged like a scene from a paperback thriller. A fake murder, yellow tape fluttering in the wind. Jimmy, jittery and smug, dropped to one knee. Not elegant, not planned, but pure chaos in him. He held out a plastic box, and inside it, a question far too real to be fake. Gretchen laughed at first, because how else do you respond when the absurd becomes sincere? But her voice caught, and she looked at him, really looked, and said yes, like it was the only thing that made sense in that moment. "We can be a family," she said, half in wonder, half in defiance. And with that word, everything cracked inside him, because Jimmy had been running from that word his whole life. Family meant loss, grief, silence, and she had said it like it was a promise. He kissed her like he meant it, held her like he might stay, but hours later, he was gone, just gone. She stood on that hill with the wind gnawing at her coat, alone with the echo of a yes, ring still warm on her finger. He drove until the stars replaced the city, found a trailer in Barstow where no one knew his name. He fixed fences, patched roofs, said good morning to strangers with sunburned smiles, and every night stared at his phone, thumb hovering over a message he couldn't send. Back in the city, Gretchen dissolved. She moved into Lindsay's place like a ghost with mail, didn't go outside for weeks. Told Sam and the guys she was in Europe, exploring new music markets. But she barely moved, barely breathed. Lindsay yelled her back into the world, and Gretchen blinked against the light like it hurt. She wandered into bars, lost hours to old noise, and met Boone, the quiet, thoughtful kind, who offered wine instead of chaos, couches instead of cliff edges. She let him orbit her, not because she loved him, but because he was still. Jimmy stayed silent, watched the cursor blink after hay, wrote and rewrote a message with no center, and finally, in a moment of breathless weakness, he sent it. Hey, no punctuation, no answers. Just the door cracked open. She saw it, stared at it like it was a ghost from a life that hadn't finished. And she drove, not to the desert, but to the house where he now lived again. She stood outside, heart thudding like it had something left to say. She hurriedly went inside the house. The silence became too loud. Then she shouted, hey. It wasn't rage. It wasn't forgiveness. It was just everything unsaid, thrown back at him. Then she walked away, back to Boone, back to clean sheets and polite dinners. But inside her, the ache stayed, not because she missed him, but because some things don't get buried. They wait, breathing just beneath the skin. Not over, not yet. The trying, they tried. God, they really did. After months apart, after Barstow, after Boone, they circled back into each other's gravity, not with fireworks, but with a quiet, stubborn will to see if maybe, just maybe, they could stand in the same room without breaking. Gretchen moved back into his place, her records stacked beside his books, her boots in the hallway, tripping him on the way to the kitchen. They learned the small stuff first. Who took which side of the bed? Which takeout place to call when neither could stand the thought of cooking? How to read the other silences without making them explode. It wasn't smooth. They were still jagged, still prone to shutting down when the ghosts got too close. Some nights, Jimmy would vanish to the garage for hours. Not gone, but not there either. And Gretchen would sit on the couch, pretending to watch something, pretending her heart wasn't trying to remember how to feel safe. Other nights, she'd push too hard, say the wrong thing, see his jaw lock and his eyes go somewhere far away. But then, there were mornings when she'd wake to him pressing coffee into her hand, or nights when he'd surprise her with some ridiculous adventure. Not grand gestures, just proof he was still in the room with her. They laughed sometimes, real laughter, the kind that made the walls forget they'd ever been quiet. And for a while, it almost felt like they were winning. But love isn't just about surviving the hard parts. It's about what you choose to do after. And they were still learning how to choose. The vow they chose over marriage. They never got married. not in the legal, paper-signed, white dress way. Instead, minutes before their actual wedding, after too much whiskey and a fight that burned itself out in the dressing room, there was silence. Not the empty kind, just tired. Jimmy looked at her and said, "I can't marry you, Gretchen." Then he left, and Gretchen, without missing a beat, followed him outside. They both knew this ceremony was just fiction. Neither of them knew how to promise forever, how to guarantee love in the way the world expected. So they made a different promise. A promise that what they had didn't need the trap of tradition, that they could choose each other every single day, without a piece of paper telling them to. It wasn't about forever. It wasn't about never leaving. It was about showing up, even when it was hard, especially when it was hard. They didn't wear rings. They didn't change their names, but they built something anyway. Late nights with music bleeding through the walls. Inside jokes no one else understood. 100 small ways of saying I'm here without ever saying it out loud. And for two people who had spent most of their lives convinced they were unlovable, that was enough. Not perfect, not neat, but theirs. And so they walked away from the venue together and went for pancakes. Every escape leads to you. A narration inspired by Prison Break, the story of Michael Scofield and Sara Tancredi. Two souls bound by fate, lies, and sacrifice. A love that survived walls, storms, and resurrections. Never promised, always inevitable. Blueprints beneath the skin. Once, there was a man who walked into a bank with a storm inside him. Not rage, not greed, but something colder. A calculation. A question wrapped in sacrifice. What would you give to save the only person who ever gave you a name worth living for? Michael Scofield didn't blink when the handcuffs closed, didn't flinch when the bars sealed behind him, because that was the plan. Every inch of him was built for it, right down to the ink on his skin. Fox River wasn't a prison, it was a blueprint, etched in ghosts, circuitry, and blood. And there, inside the hollow corridors of steel and stench and routine, he met her. Not for the first time, but the first time that mattered. Sara Tancredi, doctor, skeptic, tender in ways she tried not to be. She wore her loneliness like a stethoscope, functional, constant, never invited. He came to her with lies pressed into truth. insulin he didn't need, stories he only half told. But his eyes, they didn't lie well. There was something behind them, a quiet ache she couldn't name. "Why do you keep coming here?" she asked once. To the infirmary, to her, to the one place in that prison not designed to break men. He only smiled, that half smile that always carried a secret. "The company," he said, but what he meant was you. The walls between them were thicker than cinder block. Duty, secrets, an escape he never let her see. Yet she began to care, even when she swore she wouldn't. She noticed the way he listened, as if every word from her mouth was a wire he needed to cut, a trigger he dared not trip. She noticed the way he never looked away, even when silence was safer. And he watched her patch wounds with fingers too gentle for this place. He watched her carry compassion like armor, and wondered what it would feel like to be loved by someone like her. Around them, the world tightened. Cell counts, lockdowns, Lincoln's execution creeping closer, Michael's plan ticking like a bomb wrapped in hope. Every visit was another step. Every word from her was another thread tying him down. And still, he moved forward, because this wasn't about him. Not yet. But still, he began to dream of what might live on the other side of the fence. If she was there, if they could run toward something, not just away. He never asked for her trust, but she gave it anyway, quietly, like a key slipped beneath a door in the dead of night. And that was the first escape, the kind that doesn't break chains, but opens hearts. The price of letting him in. Trust is a fragile thing in a place built to shatter it. And still, she followed him, not in steps, but in silence, in stolen glances, in a syringe that gave him access, in a signature that loosened a door just wide enough. Sara Tancredi, daughter of the governor, had never been reckless, but Michael Scofield made her believe in things she couldn't explain, not with logic, not with medicine, only with heartbeat and instinct and that look in his eyes. He wasn't who he said he was. She knew that, knew it in the way he watched every guard, the way his answers came too quickly, like memorized poetry with a purpose behind every pause. And yet, he never made her feel small, never lied like a man who enjoyed it, only like someone who needed to survive it. She didn't fall all at once. She fell in moments. The time he let her talk about her mother, the way he listened like it mattered, the stillness in him that made her feel seen. But the ground beneath her began to shake. Inmates talking, her name whispered in corners. And then, a corridor stained in panic, a key card missing, a betrayal waiting to bloom. She confronted him, cornered by truth and trembling, and his voice so calm, so sorrowful. "I never meant for you to get hurt." But hurt didn't ask permission. It just arrived. The escape happened in the middle of the night. Fox River tore itself open like a wound, and Michael disappeared with it, along with Lincoln, and the trust she'd given like a secret prayer. She was left behind, with questions and accusations, with her name dragged across headlines, and a quiet shame blooming behind her ribs. They said she helped him, that she was in love with a con, that she threw her life away for someone who vanished into darkness. And maybe some of that was true. But love isn't always noble. Sometimes it's survival in disguise. Sometimes it's a locked door, and the key is a lie you tell yourself just to breathe. She folded into herself, addiction creeping back like an old friend with sharp teeth, loneliness louder than ever, and somewhere out there, he was running, and she didn't know if she wanted him found, or never seen again. But at night, when everything went still, she would remember his eyes, and wonder if he remembered hers, because even after the walls fell, even after everything, some connections don't die. They haunt, they echo, they wait. Run with me or forget me. The world outside prison didn't open, it exploded, with sirens still echoing in their veins, with sweat still clinging to their backs like guilt they hadn't earned yet. Michael ran, and so did Lincoln, but in every breath, every step, every jagged mile, he carried the weight of the woman he left behind. Sara disappeared from the world in a whisper, her father's name no longer shielding her, her reputation left bleeding in every headline. But she didn't hide out of shame. She hid because it was the only way to survive what her heart hadn't finished feeling. Somewhere between motel sinks and cold coffee, Michael watched the news with wide, hollow eyes, saw her mugshot, heard the words aiding and abetting, and his hands that built a flawless escape, shook with something no blueprint could fix. They found her in the silence of recovery, a woman unraveling, stitching herself back together with meetings, mantras, and minutes spent not remembering. And then in the dark, in a motel where the night pressed against the windows like judgment, he appeared. Michael stood in front of her like a prayer, but she didn't bow. She looked him in the eye and asked the only thing that mattered, "Why?" And his voice cracked beneath it, "Because I didn't know how to save my brother without destroying you." She could have walked away, could have let the pain define the last chapter of them, but she didn't. She followed, not because she forgave him, but because there were answers still buried beneath his scars. Together, they ran through cornfields and shadows, through betrayals too complex to unravel mid-step. They were hunted, watched by forces colder than prison, a conspiracy stitched into every corner of Michael's plans. He tried to shield her, even then, always. But Sara was no longer someone waiting behind glass. She fought now, fierce, angry, alive in ways she hadn't let herself be before. They kissed in the dirt of nowhere, desperate, guilty, true. It wasn't perfect, It wasn't meant to be, but in that moment, there were no fences, no lies, just the thud of her heart beneath his fingers, and the breathless space between almost lost and not yet. "I'm with you," she whispered, not because it was safe, but because some love stories don't ask for permission. They only ask for one thing: run with me or forget me. Graves that don't stay closed. There are wounds too deep for distance to cauterize, and secrets that follow even into freedom. Bellick, Mahone, Kellerman. The government had more faces than truth ever did. And Michael, the man who once controlled every variable, was now running blind, chased not by guards, but by ghosts in suits. Sara watched him unravel piece by piece, eyes darker than before, skin thinner, smiles shorter, as if every minute free cost him something she couldn't return. They made it to Panama, a fragile breath of paradise wrapped in paranoia. She held his hand on a boat like it might vanish. They kissed like survivors, not sure if it was a beginning or a goodbye. But peace never stayed long. The company, a name that sounded like a lie but hurt like truth, tore through their lives with precision. Kellerman switched sides. Lincoln's name got cleared. And Sara, she got dragged into something far crueler than prison. Kidnapped. Used as leverage. Held like a chess piece in a game Michael didn't know how to win. He broke himself trying to find her. Every door he opened led to another trap. And when they finally stood face to face again, bloodied, breathless, he pulled her into his arms like she was the last thing left that proved he was human. But it wasn't over. In a warehouse filled with choices and bullets, Sara pulled the trigger that changed everything, killed a man who would have destroyed them all. Self-defense, survival. But justice doesn't always come with mercy. She vanished again, this time to protect herself, to protect him, to give them both a chance to breathe without shackles. Michael turned himself in, traded freedom for silence, to keep her safe, and for once, didn't tell her the plan, because love isn't always shared in words. Sometimes it's in the spaces between betrayal and rescue. Sometimes it's in the way you vanish, so the one you love doesn't have to. And when she found out, when she saw him disappear behind another set of bars, she screamed without making a sound, because the man who broke into prison to save his brother had just broken himself to save her. There are graves that don't stay closed, and ghosts that aren't dead. But in this moment, all that mattered was this: she would get him back, no matter what it cost. Buried in a box made of lies. Some prisons don't come with bars. Some are built from silence, secrets, and the illusion of freedom. Michael was gone, swallowed into a black site known only to those who erased men for a living. No trial, no name, no trace, just a ghost sentenced by shadows. Sara lived with the echo of his last sacrifice, A man who had already given up everything once, now vanishing into the machine again. And she carried on like a woman made of glass pretending to be steel, raising their son in secret, miles from danger, but never far from fear. Mike Jr., his father's eyes, his mother's fire. Every day, Sara told him stories of a man who wasn't dead, just out of reach. A bedtime myth she refused to stop believing in. But Michael wasn't resting. He was surviving. Buried under a false name, forced to work for the same hands that once tried to destroy him. The company had changed its face, but its cruelty remained the same. Whip, Ya, Sid, Raymo. New names, new risks. A team of misfits and pawns caught in the same game. Michael led them, just like always. Quiet, brilliant, bleeding beneath his smile. He had to become someone else to keep them alive. Coniel Utis, a name that fit like a weapon in his mouth. But behind the alias, behind the dead eyes and coded glances, was still a man with a picture of Sara folded into his soul. She thought he'd abandoned her, thought the fairy tale had turned to ash, until the clues began to whisper. A paper crane, a coded message, a name spoken in static, and in the pit of her stomach, truth stirred. He's alive. Lincoln returned, like a storm with scars, and together they pulled the thread, tearing through governments, mercenaries, and walls that had no names, following rumors into Yemen, where chaos lived like dust in the air, where Michael was imprisoned yet again, in Ogygia, a fortress of crumbling stone and heat that seared hope from skin. But even there, Michael had a plan. He always did. Even as the world tried to beat it out of him, even as time clawed at his face and the weight of loss threatened to bury him from within, he thought of her every night, not just as a memory, but as a reason. Not to escape, but to return. And when their eyes met again, if they ever did, he hoped she'd see through the lies, through the man the world made him become, back to the one who once touched her cheek behind prison glass and promised freedom, because love like that doesn't vanish. It waits, buried in a box made of lies, scratching its way out, one heartbeat at a time. The fire in her kept him alive. When the world tries to erase a man, only love can remember him loud enough to resurrect him. Sara boarded that plane knowing she might never come back. Knowing danger lived in every breath Michael had taken since they tore him from her arms. But love, real love, doesn't ask if it's safe. It asks if it's true. Yemen was fire and ruin, a war-torn prayer of a place. And inside it, Michael was still fighting, still drawing blueprints in the dark. Still carving hope into escape plans written with blood and grit. Their reunion wasn't tender. It was desperate. A glimpse through chaos. A flash of his face, older, leaner. Eyes hollowed by years without her. But it was him. Her Michael. Even buried under that other name. even twisted by missions he couldn't explain yet. They didn't have time to embrace. Not properly. Not yet. But Sara saw what she needed to. He was still fighting for them. Through exploding cities and betrayals in every corner, Michael moved like a man with nothing left to lose except one thing. Her. They escaped Ogygia in smoke and gunfire, barely making it out before the sky collapsed behind them. And even as they ran, Michael kept glancing back, not for the prison, but for the pieces of himself he left behind. The road home was soaked in danger. The CIA, Poseidon, old enemies in new masks. But Michael wasn't alone anymore. Lincoln fought by his side, and Sara, fierce, brilliant, grieving, had already started fighting back from the moment he disappeared. She had been hunted too, by men who used their son as bait, by threats that wore badges and smiles. And still, she never broke. The fire in her had become a beacon, a lighthouse for the man who'd been lost too long. And when they finally stood together again, face to face, he whispered her name like an apology, and she touched his chest like a promise. "I knew you were out there," she said, her voice cracked, but her hands steady. He tried to explain it all. The lies he told to keep her safe, the men he had to become, the lives he couldn't save. But she didn't need the full story. She only needed him breathing, standing in front of her, still choosing her through the wreckage. Their son ran into his father's arms like he belonged there all along. And Michael, the man who had once tattooed a prison across his skin, now held the only map that mattered, the outline of a family, drawn in scars and second chances. There was still danger ahead, still a reckoning coming. But in this breath, this heartbeat between battles, he had her, she had him, and for the first time in years, they weren't running away, they were running home. Ghosts can't hold hands, but he tried anyway. Michael had learned how to live like a ghost, invisible, untouchable, moving through the world without leaving a trace. But Sara, she was the one thing he couldn't let go of, even when distance made her feel like a memory. In the quiet moments between missions, between lies, he'd take out the paper cranes, folded messages only she would understand, little pieces of himself that could slip through the cracks of his prison. He knew she might never get them, that they might be swept away by the tides of danger surrounding them both. But it didn't matter, because sending them was how he kept her close. Sara, in her own way, reached back, not with cranes, but with defiance, refusing to believe the official story, refusing to let anyone write Michael's ending but him. Lincoln had called it obsession. She called it love, the kind that doesn't fade when years pass, the kind that waits, no matter how impossible the odds. Michael worked in the shadows for Poseidon, a puppet with blood on his hands that wasn't his to spill. Every move was a calculation, survive long enough to get back to her. Every coded message a promise, I'm still yours. But ghosts don't get to hold hands. They don't get to kiss foreheads or hold their sons or feel the warmth of someone's skin. Michael carried that hunger like a second heartbeat, and it bled into everything he did. When the break finally came, the moment he could reach her without the world watching, he didn't hesitate. The crowd, the chaos, none of it mattered. He found her hand in the dark, fingers threading through hers like they'd never been apart. For a second, he let himself believe he wasn't a ghost anymore, that he wasn't Conneal Utis or a prisoner of another man's power. Just Michael, hers. They couldn't stay in that moment. The world came rushing back too fast. Gunfire, enemies, choices no one should have to make. But he'd touched her, and she'd held on. And for a ghost, that was everything. The end was never the end. For some people, endings are clean, tidy little goodbyes wrapped in closure. But for Michael and Sarah, every ending was just another beginning, another twist in the maze. They had survived prisons, conspiracies, oceans, and years of silence. But survival wasn't the same as peace. Poseidon wasn't gone, his reach stretched into every shadow. And Michael knew that as long as that man lived, they would never be free. They planned their final move like they'd planned every escape. Carefully, quietly, turning every weakness into an opening, every ally into a lifeline. Sarah was no longer the woman waiting on the sidelines. She was in it, part of the plan, part of the fight. And Michael trusted her like he trusted no one else. The final play came fast, a rush of betrayal, gunfire, and choices that couldn't be undone. Michael stepped into the fire because he always had, because he'd rather burn than watch the people he loved fall. Sarah stood in the aftermath, heart pounding, watching the man she'd thought she'd lost 1,000 times finally walk toward her. Not running, not hiding, just coming home. They didn't speak at first. Words felt too small, too fragile to hold what they'd been through. But when she finally said, "Is it over?" Michael didn't lie. "It's never over, but we're here." They walked away from that place with their son between them, hands linked. Not because the danger was gone, but because they were facing it together. The end had never been the end. It was just the start of the life they'd fought for. Scarred, fragile, but theirs. And as the sun broke through the clouds, Michael knew one thing for certain. No prison, no name, no enemy could ever take this away again.